Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on Magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. All right, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being on. Why don't we just kick off? Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and your new book?
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I am Ari Freeman. You might be able to tell from my accent that I'm from New Zealand, a town called Christchurch. I've spent 7 years previously as the apprentice to the official Wizard of New Zealand, the world's only government-appointed wizard. And I've just released a book with Aeon Books called Pragmatic Magical Thinking, Real Magic Explained, which is a book trying to cross the liminal area between full-blown occultists, stage magicians, and scientific skeptics. Aside from that, I'm a professional musician for the last sort of 25 years or so.
Excellent. So you were just mentioning that the focus of your book is something you call Pragmatic Magical Thinking, and that you're focused on talking to skeptics also. I'm interested in that.
Absolutely. Okay, so what I find is amongst religion, magic, science, art, music, what we find is that you get these groups that are attached to an identity. So you have and you're finding this even within the occult, right? These factions are we're the Solomonic magicians, we're the chaos magicians. What I find is every one of these groups has someone they're sort of kissing up to, for want of a better term. So, like, some magicians are saying, yeah, science, in a few years, science will, will validate magic, and what magic is science that hasn't been discovered yet. But there's always a group that people don't want to talk to as well. So I find... like, for a reason that magic got spelt with a K, which I know you're a fan of, is described as being that the Aleister Crowley didn't want to associate with stage magicians, with the idea being that stage magic is the fake magic and what the occult is doing is the real magic. Whereas the argument I take is the best place to start looking for what real occult magic does and what the real effects of magic in the world are is stage magic. Because if you don't know how you can be fooled, then how can you really know anything, right?
Do you find any overlap between... So I've never studied stage magic, actually.
I've researched it, but I'm a musician.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find any, it would be interesting though, do you find any overlaps between stage magic and cognitive biases though, like confirmation bias or the others?
I think it's so much more than that, Jason. I think if you go down the rabbit hole on how the human perception can be fooled and how, when it really comes down to it, our brain is a predictive machine that creates a model for reality that isn't exactly there. Our whole idea of reality is really almost icons on overlapping an operating system. Then you start to realize that all magic has a similarity to stage magic, and so does all art and music and, in fact, human communication And so I find it's a good place to start is how can you be fooled? And then what does that say about the entirety of human perception? Does it kind of make sense?
That absolutely,
So I think
absolutely makes sense. Yeah.
So stage magic is real magic. It's just that people are looking for the reality of it in the wrong place. They're going, well, okay, so the magician saws a lady in half and puts her back together. The magic isn't that an object, the woman's body got pulled apart and put back together. The magic is the bending, the manipulation of perception. And that's the definition of magic I use in this book, which is the ability to manipulate the perception in accordance with the will.
I like that.
Thank you. That makes stage magic real magic, that makes music real magic, that makes performance art real magic, and prayers and spells and summoning demons included.
Excellent. Would you say that you have happened upon anything in that research that overlaps potentially with, let's say, things that advertisers and governments use?
100%. So there's a whole section on my book about advertising psychology. So magic is really a way you can frame the world. You can think scientifically. Magical thinking is the sort of associative thinking, which is why in things like alchemy, it became Platonic. Do you know what I mean? It became the qualities that we impose on the world. So Mars is fire and red-headedness and hot temper and things like this. Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Did you find overlap between these kind of like abilities to manipulate perception or gaps in perception from stage magic and the techniques that advertisers and governments use?
Yeah, excellent. So what advertisers are generally trying to do is trying to sell you something you don't particularly need. And to do that, they're trying to create the desire in their customer in the first place. So the example I use, this was a breakthrough moment from me. I was driving down a road in my hometown, and I suddenly felt the desire for a McDonald's hamburger. And then it felt like an alien thought. It felt like a spirit had come into my head and go, you must have a hamburger. And the strange thing is I don't like McDonald's. I hadn't bought McDonald's in over a decade at that point. And I thought, well, what is it? What's happening here? And then I realized that in the drive I'd had down the street, I had passed 2 McDonald's, but I hadn't taken it in consciously. It had just gone in, not as a visual, not as the double arches, as pure desire. And that's where advertising is real charm magic.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting that they were able to slip it in a way that you weren't aware. Do you have any sense of how they did that?
Yeah, I don't know. Just association. You've worked in the advertising sector, and I know that you've talked about it, but it's that association you take,
I have worked in the advertising sector, although I will mention that when I was working in the advertising sector, I was the only one who knew anything about this stuff. So in case anyone is like,
funny, isn't it?
Yeah. So in case anyone is worried about all these, one of my core feelings in life is that you often get magical people love to project conspiracies and shadowy figures.
Yes.
One of my core feelings in life is that is all shadow projection. I'm not saying that obviously governments don't do bad things.
Okay.
But this idea of like evil cabals is probably an aspect of the magician's self that they're projecting. That's my theory.
I think that's frequently the case, and I try not to be a conspiracy theorist. I agree with you. However, the whole idea of advertising psychology, whether you think it's a theory that actually produces real world results or not,
it definitely produces real world results. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an extension historically in the 1950s of Carl Jung's psychoanalysis, and these things are mentioned in my book. So. Things like color theory.
Are you talking about Edward Bernays?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And color theory, you said?
Oh, things like color theory, like, like why are the McDonald's arches yellow? Why are they round like a pair of women's breasts? Things like that.
So you have a kind of a methodology for talking about magic to skeptics, is that right?
Well, I just try and answer their questions, Jason. Here's the thing.
Go ahead.
I find that, like I said before, groups usually have a type of person they kind of want to grab authority from, and then they have another group of people that they couldn't possibly talk to. And my main mission is just to get people to talk to each other, and for magicians to notice, the magic in advertising, the magic that a musician is using to make people dance. That all of these things are actually of a common thread.
Would you like to attempt advanced podcasting? I know you've only been on the show for 12 minutes, or on the line for 12 minutes, and you've just met me. But would you like to attempt advanced podcasting, which has not been done on this show before?
Sure.
Here is the game. Here is the role playing game that I propose. I am going to be the skeptic for once.
Yes, fantastic.
Finally, thank fuck.
Yes,
I'm doing this job for so long, and you try to convince me with magic, and I'll see if I can shut you down. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay, this will be a huge relief for me.
I was hoping I could meet you on this level. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great. Well, let's do it. Okay, what is this magic bullshit? Give me a break. What are you talking about?
Cool. So, if you look at all of the commonality, let's just as a game describe it as the ability to manipulate human perception in accordance with the will.
Whose will?
That means actively trying to. So whose will? The will of the magician.
Okay, so
the will of the person trying to manipulate.
Well, I mean, like I can convince you of something, but that's not like magic. How is that like magic powers? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, how would you define magic?
I don't believe in magic. I define magic as something in fantasy movies. That's in fantasy movies, and I guess stage magic. But magic isn't real. Everyone knows. I mean, magic. No, everyone knows magic isn't real. I mean, come on.
Yeah, everyone knows. Yeah. I get it. So, what you're doing is creating a category for things you don't believe, calling it magic and shoving everything in here. But
there's lots of things that I don't believe. Magic is one of them.
Yeah. What I'm arguing is you're failing to notice what is real about the very example you just gave. So a movie, for instance, right? The movie, you're going, well, Gandalf isn't really a real human being who throws fireballs at
right.
Giant things, right? That's not the magic. The magic is in this story. Let's take Harry Potter for an example, right? Harry Potter, yes, little children don't learn Latin words that then manipulate reality and give them cheat codes for the universe, right? The real magician is J.K. Rowling. That a concept, an idea in her head took her from being a DPB mother on the breadline to being one of the most powerful writers in history.
And now one of the most canceled, but I digress.
Absolutely. Well, that's their own damn fault, but
I think, so
the book is a spell, and the J.K. Rowling is the real magician, not...
Okay, I mean, but look, I mean, you're just putting fantasy language on things that are not fantastical or magical at all. I mean, yeah, like J.K. Rowling wrote a book, and she happened to be successful. There's lots of people who write books and are not successful. There was only ever one J.K. Rowling, but I would say that don't you think that has more to do with the quality of the writing and being in the right place in the right time? And I mean, like, but here's the thing: everything you just described, you can also describe perfectly without using the word magic. So why make things cartoony and goofy? That you're just like, people are already going to turn off what they're listening.
Right. So it's in order to not leave out things that are real, Jason. Things that have a real effect. So what I want you to do is have a look around you,
okay,
and see if you can see anything that in your room that didn't start as an idea in a human head, or as a juxtaposition, as a result of ideas in people's heads.
Okay, so then that would just be the houseplants. Although I guess I planted them, so. Nothing. But again, that just means that people have ideas and make stuff. That's not magic. That's just that's just human beings. I mean, how is that magical? That that you're just putting fantasy language on obvious things.
Yeah. So the people who really doing the magic, this is how they're describing it to themselves. The shamans. When you look at the alchemists, when you look back in history, and you look at how they really explain the world to themselves on their own terms, you'll find that they are trying to do something very practical with the way they're thinking. So, for example, in the past, the things that we now use psychology to explain as phenomena of the human brain or human mind, though it often gets framed as the human brain, used to be called angels and demons. Here's what I mean. If you go back to the first Christian monks, the Desert Fathers, they talk about the same phenomena that we describe as OCD, as intrusive thoughts coming into your head, and they call those things demons. Now, when you see what they really mean by demons, you see that they mean something far more practical. They don't mean, people getting... Well, what they say is the most dangerous demons aren't the ones that possess people and take over their voice and make them behave like a completely different entity. They say the worst demons are the nagging thoughts in your head. Maybe my wife is cheating on me. Maybe I shouldn't study for my exam. Maybe everyone thinks I'm a dick. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you see that what they're saying is there is a set of thoughts in your head that you don't want, that you're in a bad relationship with. By framing it as an other entity, you might actually stand a chance of getting rid of those intrusive thoughts. Whereas if you frame it like modern psychology in a non-magical way, you have some habits and thought behaviors and things, it's actually harder, in some ways, harder to get rid of those. Do you know what I mean? So there's a practicality to magical thinking that is not often acknowledged because skeptics don't want to take the time to understand what people meant on their own terms.
Okay. So I'll definitely grant you that this is all accurate historically, that people have believed in magic in the past. But I mean, I would simply just turn that around and say, well, but that was then. And because, what is considered magical thinking is similar to modern psychology, all that shows, or science, all that shows is that we've moved on. And now we have things that emerged out of that. We had bad ideas back when. The phenomenon we're trying to describe and manipulate are the same. But back then we had bad, sloppy ideas. Now we have much better ones and the ones that work better. So why would we go backwards? Why would we want to go back to the Middle Ages? I mean, it's kind of like saying, oh, well, somebody needs a blood transfusion. Let's go get the leeches. And what I'll offer on that is, in the real world, in the modern day, I mean, like, magic is super fun to talk about for creative people and artists and things like that. But
absolutely,
and it's super fun and all that. Like, I get that that's a vibe and all that. It's not my vibe, but I get that people have that vibe. And but I would say, like, but in the real world, when people, like, the real world examples of what you're saying are, for instance, people refusing vaccines or medical care because they want to rely on faith healing. And usually what that results in is dead kids, or dead people. Like, it doesn't get better results. So why would we want to, it's like going back to the Dark Ages. Why would we want to do that? Like, literally, why would we want to do that? We moved past that.
Okay, I'll totally explain. Firstly, okay. I am not saying that magical thinking is good or bad. I am saying it's completely unavoidable. So here's where science has got to, Jason. We have been, as 20th century people educated in the 20th century, we were taught that the universe is material, that if we had enough time, that the entire of nature would unlock her secrets to us, and that it's always better to find out new things. Those last two, by the way, are completely faith-based constructs. People haven't believed in science has two faith-based beliefs, that it's always better to find out new stuff, and that if you spent enough time, the universe would unlock her secrets to us. What's happened with science is the materialist model is dead in the water.
What do you mean by that specifically?
Specifically, we were trying to find the Lego blocks, for want of a better example, out of which the entire world was built, which is atomism, right? Which goes back to Democritus.
Mm-hmm.
So if you only found the smallest things, reductionism, then if you put them all together, the world and everything, consciousness and everything would emerge out of this matter. Well, we went smaller and smaller and smaller, and we found that we got to a layer where objects no longer exist. Things can be in more than one place at a time. Time doesn't go in one direction. Do you know what I mean? It's just as scientifically true to say that there is only one electron in the entire universe that gets reused over and over again, as it is to say there's many electrons.
So,
what we've
go ahead.
What we've gotten to is a very, very similar worldview that we had before we went on this materialist trip, which is the world is made of information, which is exactly what the world that the alchemists believed in, and that, in a sense, matter is condensed information. Now, some of you are going, no, Ari, the world's made out of energy. Okay, energy, information, it's two ways of saying the same thing. Really. It really comes down to mathematical, trying to predict where something's going to end up mathematically with probabilities. You're back to information. So, a world of spirits, a world of magical intent. My question is, does information have to become matter first in order to become conscious? Because we know you're conscious. We know you're made of matter. But quantum physics says that ultimately, underneath the matter is information fields, probabilities, things popping in and out of existence. Or can information simply become conscious without first becoming matter? If it can, you're back to your world of spirits. You're back to the world where of the alchemists, where objects are condensed concepts. Do you know what I mean? Science is mapped around to a worldview where, if you take the time to understand these things on their own terms, we're much closer to our ancestors than we even are to the people of 60 years ago.
So, okay. So here's my response. So your two things about science. The first one is you said that science has two faith-based arguments, which I disagree with.
Yep.
The first one is that you said it always wants something new. I don't think that's true. I think science is always looking for something more accurate by tests.
No. I said it's always good to find out more stuff. Science believes knowledge is the pursuit of knowledge is good for its own sake.
Well, I don't.
What I mean by that,
I don't see any argument against that. And then
no.
And the only argument against that is that you would want to stay ignorant because you cherish your current worldview, which is what I would argue.
That's right.
So I would argue that magical people are doing that. The magical worldview, although it's 100% false, they're clinging to because it makes them feel special, or they're attached to it for some reason, or it's their heritage and they don't want to give it up.
Well, let me address that.
Well, let me hold on. I'll give you. I'll address all of your points and then just hand it back to you completely. Okay. So and then I'll just let you run. So the second one is that given enough time that we can unlock the universe's secrets. That sounds like a hype tagline on science when it first came out, but I think I don't think that scientists believe that we can unlock all the secrets of the universe. I just think that, and I completely agree with them, that science is our best tool for finding out more. I don't think any scientist believes we will ultimately unlock the universe. Certainly not.
No,
in our
they no
lifetime.
longer do. But
right,
that was a scientific project.
So, but that's right. But again, with science always improves, and science, we now know that that's not possible. And so science has moved on as it's designed to do. And so the last thing, you were talking about information, energy, quantum fields. I will point out a couple things. One is the idea that the world, first of all, magical people love to throw around the word quantum.
I know.
Which they don't understand.
Sorry about that.
And I think that a lot of times when people, and this causes serious problems, I think, in society. A lot of times when people start talking about the multiverse theory or information theory, and simulation theory and all of this, what they're really talking about is interpretations of the Copenhagen experiment. These are thought experiments to explain the double slit experiment. That doesn't mean that they're real. And quite likely, if you listen to actual physicists, they think that's probably there's just something wrong with, at this point, they probably think that there's just something wrong with the double slit experiment, not that it proves some type of magic. It's just that we did it wrong. And so I offer this. A lot of what you're saying about science catching up with magic, I also disagree with, and this is what I mean. A lot of these ideas we have now about multiverse theory or quantum fields or anything that starts to sound new agey largely comes from string theory. And string theory is a subcategory of a subcategory with a tiny, tiny fringe area in physics that is frankly not taken seriously at all by modern physicists. They don't believe in the multiverse, like actual physicists, Nobel Prize winners. They don't believe any of this stuff. The people that believe in this stuff are people like Michio Kaku, who are not scientists. They're mathematicians who are generally running around spewing this Deepak Chopra bullshit to make money. So I have to disagree with you there. I think that where physics is currently is actually much more deterministic. And not non-woo. And I think the most woo thing perhaps in modern physics is the possibility that, not that there's a multiverse, but I'm referencing Roger Penrose, who's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, that there was likely a universe before this one that they can infer, but that's about as woo as it gets.
Cool. So firstly, I'd like to address a couple of things. You are somewhat projecting a new age point of view on me that I don't hold.
But you said you believe in magic. I mean, how is that different?
No, I don't believe in magic.
Oh, well then,
magic.
Well, if you don't believe in magic, then our conversation is over. Okay, great. Neither of us believe in magic. So problem solved.
Okay, what do I mean by this? Our very concept of the word belief is misunderstood by people. Generally speaking, people don't really care what you think is true. If you want to see how what someone believes, watch how they behave in the world. People behave as if magical phenomena is true. My question is, do they get something out of it? Is there a practical value to that? But before I get into that, let's just address some of these other things. Multiverse theory, string theory, I didn't bring these up. These are your things. I totally agree with you. The fringe things are over there that produced very little real world scientific results. I've read the same things you have, I think.
Okay.
So I'm not here to discuss multiverse theory. I think it is something that gets used by fiction more than it gets used by science. I'm not a particularly huge fan of Marvel movies and things like that.
Yes.
Quantum fields. I am not trying to make predictions. I'm not saying that. I'm not even saying that your consciousness imparts a reality onto particles. I'm just saying that when you get down to the small things, the materialist model falls apart and we get back to some sort of information fields. But what I'm not trying to do is come up with a model for the scientists and try and shoehorn science into that.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, people behave as if magic is real. And I completely agree with you on that. There's a great book that Carl Sagan wrote in the 90s that you may know called The Demon Haunted World, which is about how it's a great, great book that I recommend everyone, actually. It's basically this long lamentation about how all the gains we made through science are being lost to people wanting instead to believe in astrology and fundamentalism. And I would argue now that since the mid-90s, the world has become so utterly fundamentalist. It's religiously fundamental. It's political fundamentalism on both sides. And it's becoming much more like that. So I agree with you completely that people behave as if magic is real. I don't think that's controversial. I think that people have been doing that for all human history. However, my response to that is that's bad. That's bad. And I think that we have science now, which gives us something more useful. So you say that people can walk around behaving as if magic is real and they'll get certain results. And I've read, I think there's like a guy named Crowley or something like that who said something like magic is, changing conformity with will or whatever like that. And like, okay, great. But don't you think it would work better if instead of walking around, like I'm sure you can walk around believing in magic and getting results, and Crowley said something like, if you do magic, you will just get certain results and deal with it. But don't you think they would get better results if they believed something that's true and acted on something that's true instead of a wishful thinking fantasy from the past?
Cool. Okay. Give me a few
I
moments.
agree with you. I just think that's the problem with the world right now.
Yeah, you think it's a bad thing. I think it's an unavoidable thing that's neutral, that often offers good things, sometimes offers bad things. Cool. So the first thing is everybody's a magical thinker. The people who think they're rational all the time are lying to themselves, or they're a little bit exuberant. So let me list off some things that are magical thinking that people don't normally think of. The entirety of money and currency systems is based on faith-based values. A $20 bill is what is $20? I argue it's 20 trust tokens. Our ancestors decided, you have baskets, I have eggs, I want apples. How do we sort this out? So by having a neutral trade medium, money, trust tokens, a certificate saying I owe you a certain amount of value, but it's entirely a faith-based value. Money is akin to a religious belief, and if you want to see what happens when that faith falls apart, look at historically something like the East Deutsche Mark. They were, by the end, burning marks in their fireplace because the dollar bill, the money was cheaper than paper. But it gets worse than that. Our laws are faith-based. They're based on morality systems. All authority is faith-based. A police officer, there's more people than there are police officers. The only reason that, unless a police officer's actually pointing a gun at you, that they can make that they can make you do certain things is because we all agree that we don't all sort of storm them all at once. It's like every kid who went to school had this thought. It's like, well, there's only like one teacher for every 30, 40 kids. The kids could take over the school. I think every kid has thought that at some point. But every kid trusts the teacher just a little bit more than the other kids. And so that faith-based construct creates a whole real set of behaviors in society that we treat as real. We treat money as real. We treat authority as real. These are what I call useful fictions. This comes from the philosopher Hans Weinger. He came up with the term useful fictions. These are a type of magical thinking that we do all the time. Magical thinking frequently produces real-world results, and the philosophical underpinning of my argument is the philosophy of pragmatism, especially that put forth by the philosopher William James, who's an American philosopher. And science is also pragmatic. Pragmatism is the approach to truth that says that truth should be measured by its practical applications. This means if something can be shown to do something repeatedly, then something about it must be true, even if we can't come up with a perfect explanation. And science is trying to do that in scientific testing, produce repeatable results so that you can make real-world predictions. And that's what science is. It's about making predictions. Magicians are trying to do the same thing, except almost always they are trying to manipulate their own subjectivity or the subjectivity of other people. And where this produces real-world results is there's so much information whizzing past your head, and your sensory system is a filter. For instance, you only can see a small section of the electromagnetic spectrum as light, and therefore you have to make decisions about what you pay attention to. The first way to understand a practical, beneficial result of magical thinking is to realize that if you're not getting what you want, you can change the way you're paying attention, and that can change your ability to act in the world.
Okay, so I agree with you completely. I don't come to your same conclusions. So you're talking about, people, and basically nobody is rational. Most of them are kind of lying to themselves or over exuberant and are operating on something subjective that is not objective. I completely agree with you on that. I think that almost everyone is irrational, that they're acting on, they're reacting to emotions.
and that they haven't thought things through, and that modern belief systems can be, including money, like you point out, are just as faith-based in many cases as these older systems. And I think that anyone who's lived through the kind of barbarism of the last 3 years can see that clearly, that just because we have iPhones does not mean that we're not superstitious and our thinking is not bad. My argument, but what I take from that is not that therefore nothing can be rational and we should revel in irrationalism and kind of mental illness. My argument is, well, this is what the scientific method is for. The scientific method begins with understanding this, that people are irrational, that they are acting on faith-based arguments, and that is why we have the scientific method, to find out what's real and to completely, as much as possible, separate it from human biases, because we know we're all biased. We know we're all biased. And that's why we have to have systems to remove ourselves from it, because no human on their own can just simply shut off their bias. It's just not possible. And you mentioned that truth is measured by practical use. I just think that's wrong. I think that truth is truth. Yep. There's, it's like, you can make measurements about the orbit of a foreign celestial body, and there's no practical use, but it's still true. And I will also even make a sociological argument on that if you start from the argument that truth can only be measured by practical use, well, enacted in the real world, what that means is now science becomes completely beholden to the business world, because now it only exists to create things of practical use. Well, that might increase the comfort of humanity, but it will not increase its knowledge. And things that are practical is only a subset of things that are true. So, example being, advanced astrophysics, advanced mathematics. We're looking for fundamental truths that may be utterly impractical, but we need to find them anyways. So, my argument that I return is simply that I agree with you. And what I take from that is why we should absolutely embrace scientific thinking, and as much as possible these days, particularly in the age of AI, data-driven learning, rather than, I don't know. I don't know what's the alternative, like putting on face paint and waving your hands around at a festival or something. Like what does that do for anyone?
To what?
Like, what is
what was my choice?
Well, you're talking about magic and things like that. And it's like, okay, so in the real world, what you're saying is people should stop doing real science and should like stick bones in their nose
I never said that.
and wave their hands in the air on ketamine at festivals. And that's somehow better or something like that.
Oh, absolutely not. No, so I deeply respect science just like you. What I'm saying is, I think you're trying to expand science. You have a faith in science that extends beyond what it's got its ability to do. Where science is expensive, takes a lot of effort, and we can't do science all the time. It's wrong to raise your child like a scientific experiment. Do you know what I mean? It's going to produce problems. It's wrong to love your wife as a scientific experiment. There's other modes of human thought that produce real knowledge, and the idea that scientific knowledge is the only path to truth, or even the greatest one, is the concept scientism. Scientism is a misapplication of science. A couple of things. Science depends on philosophy to even ask what is a scientific question, which has evolved over time. Two, you said that we got to look at if you look at the orbits of some sort of planetary body, and you're saying that's not practical. Well, firstly, to do the measuring of the orbits, you're relying on numbers, and when numbers are not material in the first instance. That was a lot of what the alchemists were saying back in the day. So we're relying on this level of reality that has no materiality in order to be materialist, which is a little strange in the first place, that science is so dependent on math, and yet there is no objective reality to the number 2. It's a symbolic reality, not an objective one. The other one, you jumped on this idea of practical use. No, I meant real world results. Real world results. So if you do
doesn't
something,
change my argument.
Sorry?
That doesn't change my argument.
It doesn't? Okay. So if you look at the problems of our age, as 20th century people, we were sort of taught the year 2000 is the date of the future. There was the whole Y2K thing that you and I remember. And we were kind of told through media that either we were going to end up with a technological version of God's kingdom on Earth, that will have a bunch of robots to do all the work for us, and humans can just play in the sunshine. And that's sort of the Star Trek universe. Star Trek was sort of the projection of a utopian future. Or the thing that people are, and I've heard you worried about this today, the idea that computers and artificial intelligence will take over the world and eventually decide that human beings aren't needed, and that's the Terminator 2 universe. I think both of those are deeply problematic faith-based constructs that very much mirror the imprinted religious ideas that we previously had. God's kingdom on Earth for Star Trek, and Armageddon on Earth for Terminator 2. What we are seeing in these, and the reason things look so dark in this age, is because the 20th century views, and actually the views going right back to humanism, so sort of a 500-year turnover, it's a massive loss of faith in those values. That's what we're seeing. So nobody believes that investment in technology and science alone will heal the environment now. We actually have to change people's values and how they behave in the world. No one believes, a lot of the political constructs we put in place to stop war, we're losing faith in those at the moment. And so warring factions are moving in. And I don't want to get too into the details of that, but it's interesting as a meta thing. So whatever we do to change our values to solve these problems, and I believe we will, we'll move through some tension. Those changes of faith-based values, those changes in behavior, the changes of our philosophy, it's going to look like magical thinking to people who grew up in the scientific age.
Okay. So here's my counter. My first immediate counter is, should we indeed leave something that you refer to as the scientific age, then it will only be to plunge backwards into barbarism and darkness. I can think of few more frightening phrases than the end of the scientific age. I mean, that to me just sounds like the fundamentalists win. So here I'm going to address a few points. You say that science is more expensive and requires more effort. Yeah, you get what you pay for. Right. It's like just because it's expensive and requires effort, like the Hadron Collider or something like that. And by the way, that's only some scientific experiments. It's certainly not all of them. You can do kids can do scientific experiments. So just because it's expensive and it takes effort is certainly not an argument against it. In fact, it's an argument that we're perhaps for it. You mention scientism. And I agree with you there. And I think that what scientism is another symptom of this superstition, which is people who don't understand science looking at science and taking it as on a faith-based basis. Because and I agree with you that it's faith-based. However, that's not actually science. That's just the perception of the public at times who is that is the product of scientific illiteracy. And so if anything, that's simply an argument for more scientific education. Example.
I apart from the very last thing you said, I'm 100% with you and 100% agree. And that was my actual point.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So for me, it's just, scientism is an inevitable effect of handing something real to superstitious people. They will make a superstition out of it, but that's not an argument against science. It's an argument for more science. You mentioned, and a case in point on that, you mentioned journalists and the media giving us a certain view of science. Well, I've worked as a journalist. I know and the way that journalists report on science is they pull whatever is the latest story from ScienceDaily.com or PLOS or something like that, and they report it. But journalists are also scientifically illiterate, and they often report, for instance, sociological studies as scientific truth. They report reviews of literature as scientific truth. And this is where we get things like people thinking the multiverse is an actual proven fact. It's not. It's just a thought experiment. And so a lot of damage is caused by journalists who are scientifically illiterate, or not fully literate, and that's certainly not all of them, but it is quite a few of them, reporting things inaccurately. But that's not a comment on the study they're commenting on. It's a comment on their ability to summarize it, and that does the public a bit of a disservice. You also mentioned...
I 100% agree with that too.
Okay, great. You also mentioned alchemists. Okay, well, this is a perfect case in point because alchemy produced exactly nothing, despite most of the alchemists being threatened with death if they couldn't produce gold by the various monarchs of Europe. And in my read of alchemy, they were unable to deliver, and so therefore they fell back on this kind of like, well, it's kind of a metaphor and all that to try and save their face and possibly lives. But this is a perfect example. Alchemy failed, but from it was born chemistry, which worked. So why would we go back to the drawing board? We have the thing that worked. We don't need to go back to the blueprint, the iteration of experiment that didn't work. It's basically like saying, let's like roll back 400 years of progress and 10,000 iterations plus, to go back to the original thing that didn't work in the first place. It's like replacing the solution for the problem. And you mentioned objective reality of numbers. I would argue that is something that is the province of scientism. And I'm talking about this multiverse debate because I just kind of watched this debate between Michio Kaku and Roger Penrose and another physicist. This is actually the modern physicist's argument against, for instance, string theory, which they see as just simply a con. I think it kind of is.
Just to be fair to me, I'm not interested in string theory or multiverse, and I share all your concerns.
Okay, got it. So I'm just picking on this just because I watched a YouTube on this 2 days ago. So I
also think it's fringy science. I also think it's spent 70 years. String theory in particular spent however long it is, 60 years, producing very, very little results.
Yeah. And I think this is...
And we could have been doing better science with those resources.
I agree with you. And I think that that's a perfect example of chasing magical thinking being an utter dead end. And I think that, and a waste of time for everyone. And unfortunately, the thing about string theory, I know that you're not into it, but the thing about string theory as an example is it's captured the, kind of to your point where, so kind of one of your points is that subjective, magic is the ability to affect consciousness, to change subjective reality, to change people's meaning of how they see things. Well, I would argue, that's psychology and advertising, and if you want to call it magic, okay, great. But I would argue that that's not good either. And string theory is a perfect example because of Marvel movies, like you mentioned, and things like this, the public has been convinced that it's real and that it's the cutting edge of science, and it just isn't. It's a dead end, but the public believes it. So that basically shows that what you're saying, where the subjectivity of people can be manipulated. I just certainly don't agree with that. I just think that that's bad, and that's why we have the scientific method, hopefully, to get around that. And the other reason I bring up string theory in this case is because string theorists do believe in the objective reality of numbers. They kind of have this Platonic view of them.
Oh, cool.
Right?
Interesting.
Yeah, they have this view of the objective reality of numbers because they're mostly mathematicians, and actual physicists are like, no, that is silly. That's Platonic thinking, right? Like, no, there is no objective reality to numbers. That's bizarre. So,
just one thing. So
I'll hand it back to you. Actually, go ahead.
Just so we can get off the stepping stone, and you can reply to this. Science depends on a couple of things. It depends on the philosophy of science. Do you agree?
No, I think it depends on the scientific method, which is not a philosophy, but a working method.
Okay, the very question, what is a scientific question, is a little harder than non-scientists understand. And it has evolved over time. We didn't just suddenly... people often like Karl Popper and his idea of falsifiability, but it's still not a perfect scientific framework for what is a scientific question. So, I have a friend who's a philosopher of science, travels the world doing it. So, philosophy has an ongoing interaction with science, and I argue that you can't actually progress science without that. People seem to have this idea that scientific frameworks sort of got frozen in history and now they're good for the rest of time. but especially in the light of our like quite massive changes in our entire cosmology, quantum physics and things like that, it completely changes the types of questions and the types of things you might want to frame as a scientific question. And I don't want to go too much into details about that because I'm the wrong person to ask, but it is a thing.
Well, okay. So basically you're saying that the methodology and what you're saying is the discourse of science has advanced. And okay, great. It's advanced by experiment, right? So of course, even
through philosophy too.
Well, everything has to be testable. And basically what my response is that I think that what you're trying to do is point at parts of what we think as objective that are actually subjective. Am I correct in that?
That's part of the game I'm playing. Yeah, I'm trying to point out a lot of the things. Okay, here's the important thing.
Okay.
Objectivity is not something you generally achieve. Objectivity is an ideal you orientate yourself towards in order that you can come up with better probabilities, and in order that you can come up with better predictions. So more objective is more certain. Cool. But because this is why stage magic's an interesting inroad to this. Do you know about the experiments that Magick and James Randi did with that science lab for a couple of years?
Remind me. Not the details.
No, there was a science. This is in my book somewhere, but I've forgotten all. But anyway, if you look up Magick, who was a stage magician, and he was a young guy. He hooked up with James Randi, the skeptic, who's a bit problematic. But anyway, and they ran for about 2 years a scam, a stage magic scam on a laboratory lab involving spoon bending, moving items around inside of a sort of a glass object, things like that. And it was all tricks. It was all sleight of hand and magnets and all sorts of things. But they fooled these scientists for 2 years to the point where they were actually delivering their results at a conference, and the magicians got up and debunked it and said, no, we've been lying to you the whole time. And this shows a very the reason they were able to do that is because science can only do science on repeatable results. Otherwise, it's just a blip in your data. So you might get a measurement, you might get a radio wave from another planet or something, and it looks, and it's like the wow signal. Do you know about that one?
Which one?
It was a radio wave from another.
I don't.
It doesn't matter. But you might get a blip. You might get a radar of some sort of sea monster or something. But if you never get it ever again, if you never get the evidence ever again, you can't say anything scientific about it.
Right.
So in order for a scientific experiment to be possible, it has to have repeatable phenomena. The problem is that unrepeatable phenomena is actually moderately common. So there's a lot of things that are very hard to do science on because they might only happen once every 1,000 years or so.
Okay. So then my response... Go ahead.
Objectivity is something you orientate yourself towards.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you generally achieve with any degree of perfection.
Okay, so I agree with that. And I think the scientific method begins from that proposition. It begins from the proposition that we don't know anything and that we can only progress towards knowing something by iterating experiments. I would say, as far as James Randi, the fact that an entertainer was able to fool a scientist does not prove magic. It proves that the scientist was incompetent.
Oh, no, I'm arguing for your side.
Oh, I see.
In this.
Okay. So, yeah, so that's basically my point.
I'm saying this, but I'm trying to point out that because James Randi is he was a total materialist. He wasn't a particularly nice guy.
Well, good. I'm a total materialist. It's hopefully he was debunking some of this new age stuff.
My point is that he was able to fool the scientists by trickery. He was a trickster. He wasn't a someone who believed. He was a materialist, which shows the difficulty of even running objective
I
experiment.
disagree with that. And we don't know the whole data there. I'll just go back to what I said, which is if an entertainer was able to introduce false data into an experiment and sway the scientist, it proves nothing other than the scientist was incompetent and the experiment was designed in such a way that allowed the admission of false data. So that really doesn't show anything.
It shows that it shows the difficulty of running a perfect experiment. That the suggestion is, and it's only a suggestion, that if they were able to do that, and this is true. This is why we have peer review and things like this. That it's quite easy to get the wrong idea.
Well, I would say
some scientific tests, especially if they're not badly done.
I would say in response to that, then, well, it's good that they did that for the following reason. That sounds kind of like penetration testing for computers, where you hire hackers to try and hack your app or your system to see if they can do it. So basically, if James Randi was able to demonstrate to the scientist that he could hack his experiment, well, great. He's just shown a flaw in how the experiment was constructed. Fix the flaw and run it again.
I agree. So you said alchemy produced nothing, that they were embarrassed that they couldn't produce gold. And you say that it's good that science moved away from that. Mm-hmm. This is a misinterpretation of what I was saying too. I'm not saying we should go back to alchemy. I'm saying we have inadvertently ended up back in places that are similar to where alchemy was. So what I mean is after the alchemical experiments where they couldn't produce gold, it was assumed that things were fixed. They came up with this idea of elements in the periodic table sense, and that these were like the irreducible parts of matter. And we now live in a universe where you can make gold from lead, and they did it in one of those large colliders of the same type as the Large Hadron Collider.
But that's okay. Well, that's cool, but that's recent. That's not that's not alchemy. It's the Large Hadron Collider.
No, I agree. Inadvertently, the alchemists were a little bit right in that they believed in a universe where it is possible to turn other elements into gold, specifically lead, and that modern science has achieved that. What the alchemists were wrong about, philosophically, they were correct. You can produce gold out of lead. Philosophically, their only problem was they radically misunderstood how much energy it takes to do that. And one other small problem, the gold you end up with is an unstable isotope that eventually turns back into lead. So the universe doesn't like you doing that. It goes back into lead after a while, but it is possible. We live in a universe in which it's possible for lead to be turned into gold, and the alchemists were correct about that.
Okay, great. So then, this is actually a great way to approach this. Then, so here, I think maybe what we're looking at here is the difference between bad science or bad proto science and good science. So, back in the alchemy days, they were trying to basically they were starting with an overwhelming goal, which was financially incentivized. It's like they weren't starting with the question, they were starting with the answer, right? And this is really bad. It's bad in the business world. It's bad in life, right? To begin with something that you are you only want one answer. And for whatever reason, whether it's monetary, whether it's financial, whether it's faith-based, you're trying to manipulate stuff to get that. And that's clearly the case with alchemy, largely because most of them were told by royalty, we will literally murder you if you don't produce gold, because they thought that would motivate them. Well, now in terms of the Hadron Collider, now that's interesting, because what happened there is they arrived at the result that the alchemists were aiming for, at least momentarily, but they arrived there by successive experiment, not by starting with the answer. They got there by starting with the question and testing hypotheses, and eventually they arrived at something. I don't even know if they were trying to do that or not. And so that basically shows you that one of those approaches worked and one didn't. And that just shows that the scientific method is the thing that actually produces and delivers.
Okay, before you have a scientific test, you have to have a hypothesis, and that's where the creativity enters in science. And if you look through in history, you'll find these things don't make it to scientific papers because you're only supposed to write certain kinds of information in scientific papers. But there's also, you can come up with a scientific hypothesis any way you want, any creative way. You can get it from a dream, you can get it from an LSD trip. These things have happened occasionally in science. It's the testing that proves it true or untrue. My point is that inadvertently, I'm not saying science should become this. I'm not saying people should do this. I'm saying inadvertently we've ended up in a culture where this stuff has happened anyway. Science has done an about turn and ended up with a world that's made of information, which is closer to the alchemical point of view by accident, but it's interesting. And that in these older thought forms, there are hypotheses that turned out to be validated, and that the alchemists were right that the universe allows you to turn lead into gold, though it's harder than they thought. So we've ended up, it's not that we should, I'm not trying to say, I'm saying it's going to happen anyway. Magical thinking is neutral, and you've been arguing as if I think it's a good thing. You can use magical thinking to fuck up your life, and you can also use it to make your life more successful, more interesting, because people are going to do it anyway, and generally,
people are going to do heroin anyway. So I don't know if that's an argument for you.
And there's good and bad ways to do heroin.
No, I'm sorry, wait. Let me stop you there. There are only bad ways to do heroin. Okay.
No, just give me. Okay. No, just. I mean, it was originally. I don't mean that people should go out and do it. I mean that it was originally designed as a medical drug.
And is abused even as a medical drug. So that I get. Yeah, it's useful in a medical context, but that itself shows you that why there needs to be scientific controls on things and testing and things like that, and you can't just just open up the floodgates. So
we can't do science on everything. Science has a poor model for consciousness, has a poor model. But psychology is generally not science.
No, I agree with you.
It tries to be scientific.
But science never says it has the answer. It doesn't say we have the answer for these. It says that the only way we're going to get to the answer is by experiment. It never started from this proposition that it knew everything. Outside of this, you're left with magical thinking in many cases. Yeah, you are, and that's what we're trying to get rid of.
So the choice. I'm sorry, Jason. The choice is not between objectivity and magical thinking. Don't get me. The choice is between worse magical thinking and better magical thinking.
Oh, well,
like you could spend.
How is the scientific method better magical thinking? That doesn't make sense.
No. Science is over there. We agree on that. But for the rest of the time, you can't do science on whether you love your girlfriend. You can't do science on, do you know what I mean?
Well, I disagree with you because I actually totally disagree with you, because when you're in love, you have more of the oxytocin hormone, which can be tested in a blood test, or you can do an MRI and see the changes in somebody's brain. And I will say this, just because we can't currently measure something doesn't mean that we won't in the future. And we'll get to the thing in the future by
that's
progressive
back to what
experiment.
I said at the beginning.
What,
I did say that
argument?
At the beginning. I said science has a faith-based value that if you just... the scientific institution, I should say, that if you just had enough time, that you'd unlock all the secrets of the universe.
But that's not what I said. What I said was we start from the proposition that we don't know anything, and we may not know everything, but the only way that we can actually get somewhere valid is by progressive experimentation. Science, I don't think, ever says that we're going to learn everything. It might have 200 years ago, but it certainly doesn't now.
You just proposed that, given enough time, we'll understand, we'll be able to reduce love to chemicals.
We already can. We already can.
So
have you ever taken ecstasy?
I haven't, no.
Oh, well, love is chemically inducible. So yeah, we absolutely can.
So you've decided to date a woman, and good on you, but instead of and taking some chemicals.
What do you mean?
So what if it's all chemical, if it's all reductionistic, because I actually think I don't want to get personal. I think a relationship between one person and another is actually on many levels. So the societal level, it's an interpersonal level, all of these things. You can't just reduce it to freaking oxytocin. Or you would have continued to take MDMA and you wouldn't actually be in a relationship.
Maybe you don't want, I didn't say keep taking MDMA. maybe what's more likely is you don't want it to be reduced, because it quite likely can be.
It can't be.
No, it can. Love is a physical. You may have all these meanings you put on top of these chemicals, but at the end of the day, love is not Shakespeare sonnets, and those are all human. That part is magical thinking. There's nothing objective about it.
It is magical thinking,
but
yes.
But love is objective and can be measured and induced even. So I disagree. And I will say that you're kind of saying that maybe science makes a faith-based argument because we'll get to know everything. I don't think that it makes that claim. I think that most modern physicists don't make that claim, or scientists don't make that claim. I will say, however, hold on. I will say, hold on a second. I will say, however, that you are making a faith-based argument, which is that we are somehow progressing towards a future, you said post-science age, that we're progressing towards magical thinking, that things are going to come back to the way that they were. Prove it.
Okay, I don't want to get rid of science, so that's not a view I hold. So most of this debate has been framed as if I'm negating science, or I think science is a bad thing.
Don't you think that putting out the idea of magical thinking into the public will automatically be a bad thing for society and kind of push them away from more rational thinking?
I addressed this before, but you skipped over it.
Okay.
I'm afraid your choice, and you kind of almost agreed with this, but then you missed it. The choice, Jason, is not between no magical thinking and magical thinking. The choice is between better magical thinking and worse magical thinking, because magical thinking is going to happen anyway. So those people, now you're somewhat of a motivational life coach, I believe.
How dare you?
Degree, right?
How dare you?
I'm sorry. I've heard you've.
I'm just sitting here, okay? I'm just a guy making a living.
Okay. Anyway, you've sometimes presented yourself in that way, which is fine. So if someone's magical thinking is I'm such an idiot, nobody loves me, blah blah blah, then what's wrong with replacing that magical thinking with something that actually allows them to improve their mood, get something done,
that's
feel better about themselves?
That's just psychology. That's just psychology, not voodoo.
Yeah, that's right.
So why are you calling that magic? I mean, I get that as it's cool and artistic. It makes you sound cool, but that's why do we need to throw this silly word into actual disciplines like psychology?
Because if you call it psychology and separate it from magic, then you're drawing a line in history, and this is the problem with scientism. You're drawing a line in history where you're saying, and you said this earlier, where everyone before this time was very, very stupid, and I'm not even going to bother looking at how they saw the world or what they got out of it. And now we're very smart, and we're projected towards a better future where, because we know more stuff, it's definitely going to turn out real well. Well, if you look at the things that the ancients achieved, for instance, I live in New Zealand, right? And this is a Pacific island. And before the greatest sailors on Earth, bar none, were the Polynesians, until the Europeans invented a very special type of clockwork that works on the ocean. The Polynesians got all the way to South America.
Wow.
Without science. The word kumara, which is our word for sweet potato, it's the Maori word for sweet potato, Maori being our indigenous people, is not actually a Polynesian word. The word for kumara in the Peruvian languages is one of the words they use is kumara. So it turns out to be a word that's of South American, native South American etymology. They have the genetics. They know that. Okay, so they got that far, right? They got all the way. The Maori language is nearly mutually intelligible with Hawaiian, and it's nearly mutually intelligible with the language of Rapa Nui, which most people know as Easter Island. Go look on a map and see how far those places are from each other. The Pacific Ocean is like a third of the entire world's surface or something. These people did that without being without any of your modern science. So
Well-
what I'm saying is the ability and wisdom of the past, it looks like magical thinking, but there's stuff in there that's usable. They did all of that without clockwork.
Okay, well, I don't disagree with that, and I think that, you know, prior to science, it's not like people weren't trying to do stuff, but they were kind of fumbling around in the dark. All this other magical thinking was mixed up in it. But, you know, it's like modern science, is a modern construction that is a refinement of the way that people do things to remove errors as much as possible. And it allows us to do things much more precise and much more quickly. And so, Polynesians might have sailed around the world. The Egyptians built pyramids. This doesn't prove magic.
Yeah.
It just proves that they solved a couple of engineering problems. And that's great. But all you need to do is look at the progress of the world since the birth of science, which it's moved almost infinitely greater. It's changed in almost infinitely greater orders of magnitude than the entire time before that. So basically what I'm saying is, we had things that kind of worked and we were fumbling around in the dark. Finally, we found something that really worked and we got our game on and we got our shit together. Why would we want to go back?
Okay. So I take some exception to the phrase fumbled about. But I do agree with you that things have progressed order of magnitude, but you're placing a value on other types of technology, I think is the right word for it, that doesn't come as a result of science.
Well, no. Well, hold on. It came from human beings physically manipulating the human world. It came from engineering. It's just that science is a discipline that came later that allowed us to refine it. It doesn't mean that people putting together boats were like violating the laws of physics or something like that.
So the Polynesian, and I only know a little bit about this, but if you can go and study how to be a Polynesian navigator in the modern world, there's a course in Hawaii. The whole thing was reconstructed by an incredible guy called Maupialuk, who was a Micronesian guy who'd been trained in the tradition of navigation. But go look at what they're doing. It's going to look like magical thinking to you. They base their map. We base our maps on paper. They base their map on a fishing net. So they create a fishing net that's spread out between sticks, and it's got little pebbles and shells and things. And it's a map. You hold it up to the sky and sort of like overlay it on the sky, and that helps you know where you are.
Okay, but I would hazard a guess that if you took that system and took everything that looked like magic or superstition out of it, it would still work, and you would realize that all that superstition was just cultural gloss laid on top of whatever thing it was that they figured out.
Okay, I'll give you another example that this is
but
one
I mean,
of the things
you agree that that's probably true, right?
Sorry?
You agree that that's probably true, right? I mean, just because they put nice decoration on it doesn't mean that it somehow violates physics. Right. It's like what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't violate physics. I'm saying it looks like magical thinking to outsiders.
Well, everything prior to science looks like magical thinking to outsiders because that's what it was.
Exactly.
So we have something better now. Why would we want to go back to it's basically like, okay, did the internet work in 1996? Yeah. Would you want to use the internet? Would you want to go to spacejam? You can see how the internet was in 1996 by going to spacejam.com if you ever want to do that. Did it work? Yes. Did it produce certain results? Yes. Would I ever want to go back to it? Fuck no.
Okay.
We have way better shit now.
Yeah. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. This is this sort of belief in progression.
What do we have now that's worse than the past? In terms of science, not political.
Well, I'm hearing a very dismissive attitude to the achievements of other cultures.
No. I'm not dismissing it. I'm just saying that that's the past.
But they actually did that stuff. Got all.
No, I'm not saying that they didn't. I'm just saying that was something that worked then, and we have better stuff now. We've built. That's the same with all cultures. We've built on our successes and refined them. That doesn't mean we should go just because something worked before. Doesn't mean we don't have something that works better now.
Okay, I'm going to give you another example from my culture, right? The thing I'm most proud of my country in recent time for, and the thing I'm most proud of us politically, is the Maori people. There's a bunch of different tribes in different places. We call them iwi. Starting with in 2014, a court case was won between the New Zealand government against the New Zealand government by Tūhoi Māori. Tūhoi are one of our tribes. They live in the North Island, and they live in a valley. They're called Te Urewera. Now, most Māori have a story going back to the navigators who came here. So the canoes that brought the Polynesians to New Zealand, except Tūhoi. Tūhoi have a different story. Tūhoi say that their ancestor was born of the mountain and the mist. That these are like they're both physical parts of the landscape, and they are like gods as well. And that the union between the feminine mist and the male mountain produced a human being, a male ancestor, and they descend from that person.
Right, but all of that is not true.
But listen, because I haven't got to the point yet.
All right, go ahead.
And that the valley that they live in, Te Urewera, is therefore literally their ancestor in their mythology, right? So they claim ancestry to the land. Now that's magical thinking. You just jumped on and said, no, magical thinking, Ari. It's like, cool. So the question is, and this is pragmatic, this is my point, pragmatic magical thinking. Can their belief allow them to do something in the world, a real result that your belief can't? Okay, here's what they managed to do. They won a court case accepting under New Zealand law that the valley is their ancestor, that it's a real person. It's the personhood case. They granted Te Urewera legal personhood. Now, this sounds like magical thinking. We have legal personhood in the West in terms of corporations, and we have for hundreds of years. This is so that you can have a contract with a corporation, and you have to, that corporation has rights, so you have to pay the corporation back. And no matter if all the people have left the corporation, you could have a 100-year-old debt to that corporation as a legal person. So it was using an element of Western law and New Zealand law and European law that there was also already a precedent for. But by making the valley a legal person and giving it rights, making it illegal to violate the rights of that valley, they have better protected that valley under environmental law than we have been able to do through a materialist idea that a mountain is a dead thing. And just to show you how influential this has been, 2017, they made a river a legal person for the same reasons, for environmental protection and because of a spiritual connection in their mythology. There was the Whanganui River. Just this year, we made a mountain Taranaki a legal person. This has been noticed by Indigenous people all around the world. And after the Whanganui River, 2017, the river Ganges was made a legal person by a group of Hindus for exactly the same reason, because it was seen more pragmatically to help change the values of people around in their relationship to that piece of land so they can better environmentally protect it. This is pragmatic magical thinking. They were able to do something that treating a landscape as a dead, lifeless thing doesn't allow you to do.
Okay. So I will say that's interesting. I mean, that's a super cool story. But that's law. That has nothing to do with science. And that has a lot more to do with probably the local politics between groups and people not getting their toes stepped on and recognizing indigenous beliefs and things like that. And all of that is wonderful. But, you know, like that certainly doesn't prove magic. I think that here's a counterexample to what you're saying, or it's actually the same example. You know, in Iceland, they believed in elves forever. And there's movies you can watch about it. They believe elves come out of rocks and things like that. There's all these fey creatures everywhere, to the point where even I read in an in-flight magazine, even in the modern world, if they're building a road and somebody has a dream that an elf lives there, they will stop building the road. And I believe that this is in law. Now that's great. That's a very quaint tradition. That's great to tell tourists when they come. Elves don't exist. Okay. Just because it's basically kind of like, you could also make the argument. It's like, well, it's very pragmatic for parents to tell kids that Santa is real because it's fun and that it's a reason for getting presents. But well, that's great and that's wonderful, and I'm not going to take that away from anyone. But there's no Santa. Okay, so great, that can be, this type of discourse is maybe fun in movies or, for kids or something like that. But, it's imperative as a culture that we keep anything that looks like magical thinking out of certainly the scientific discourse, I would say out of the discourse on what reality is. And as evidence, I show you this fake news era that we're in, how catastrophic actually it has been for society to even, for instance, ditch the idea that there may be an objective truth. That's been unbelievably it's like battery acid for society, and we don't even know what the hell's going on anymore. So I would say that we still, I think that it's as somebody said once, it's a long hard road out of hell being superstition in the Middle Ages, and we're still coming out of that. And if anything, we're seeing huge regressive forces now, the rise of fundamentalism in America, in the Middle East, in political fundamentalism, fake news, Donald Trump, all this stuff. Like, if anything, we need to get magical thinking out of our society. And I would argue that our society would be much better served if instead of all of this, it was, we take kind of the AI route and start making decisions based on data and not people's subjective feelings. Because people's subjective feelings you're kind of talking about the realm of people's subjective feelings. Well, people's subjective feelings are kind of always wrong. So that's why.
They're always a little bit wrong. Yeah.
Well, often they're very wrong. Often my subjective thing, I go through every day having wrong ideas subjectively. Whether it's a conversation I'm having with somebody in my mind or I misinterpret what something says, and I'm constantly having to check myself so that I don't react to something that I perceived that was not actually there. So, which we need to be doing as a society.
Which other things do you want me to reply to? Do you want me to reply to the elves idea? Do you want me to reply to the fundamentalism idea?
My overall point is just because people engage in magical thinking doesn't mean A, it's real, and B, that it's not a problem. And I would say that you say you're saying there's useful and less useful magical thinking.
Thank you. That's what I'm saying.
So you're saying that. I also disagree with that. I just think I think that there's a guy named Steven Novella who's a great skeptic. He wrote an audiobook called Your Deceptive Mind, which I'm always recommending to people. It goes over how our minds lie to us. I'm sure in this context, you'd probably be very interested in it. He says, people always, here's a classic thing. People always say well, there's Western medicine and then there's Eastern medicine. And Steven Novella is like, no, there's medicine that works and there's medicine that doesn't. And that's pretty much how I feel. So to wind it back a bit, where you're talking about, well, these Maori have this navigational system that's really valid. Well, great. Let's test it. And if it works, let's incorporate it. But if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But it sounds like it works. So let's use the scientific method to figure out what's working and incorporate that into our knowledge base.
No, please don't misunderstand me. My point was that they discovered a technology without the use of clockwork, that it took Europeans developing not only clockwork, but clockwork that moves on ways. Specifically so there's latitude and longitude, right? You can figure out latitude just using position of the sun. And I think a compass and your position to your sun, right? But longitude is the thing that took people a mass amount of time through history. The Europeans got lost all over the world for ages and ages, anytime they weren't hopping coastlines. Like, the reasons that the Vikings got to Newfoundland was because they were more or less hopping coastlines, and just they'll spend like a week in the open water, that they'll end up some semi-random place on the new continent. But to go across the Pacific is something else. That's completely different. That's an order of magnitude more complex.
I'm not saying they didn't do it. I'm not saying they didn't do it.
And my point is that you're framing things as if the people in the past not only didn't have answers, but our answers now are much better. But compared with 15th century, the Polynesians were producing results that were nearly as good as a 15th century
Well,
sailor.
That's great. And I will say, I never said that we weren't figuring things out or getting things to work before science. And by the way,
to dismiss.
well, hold on.
And I also said that. Okay.
So I never said that. I'm just saying because I'm going to lose what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I'm worried about that too.
I've been taking notes if you want. So I never said that we weren't getting things to work or figuring things out. And it kind of sounds a little bit like you're kind of also making an argument that what I'm saying may be Eurocentric. And just to be clear, science did not originate in Europe. I mean, it started in the Middle East. And it came out of Middle Eastern alchemy and things like that. So
and Persians.
Right.
Persia, yeah.
So I'm not like, basically what I'm saying though is, and I'm certainly not making the claim that like Europeans know everything there is to know now. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is clearly they did something that worked. But like just like in everything in life, everything follows the Pareto principle, which is that 20% of the thing does 80% of the work. So what I'm saying is, with this kind of system, they may have 20% of actual hard thing that worked and 80% magical fluff. And if we put that to the scientific method, then we can isolate the thing that works. And if it's something that we don't know, wonderful. And I think that one of the great things about having a global, multicultural, internet-connected world with availability of information is now we can learn things like this. That there's things that we don't know that other cultures do and begin to learn from other cultures and things we haven't. But that stuff still needs to be tested. So it's like we just have more stuff to put to the test. And so I'm certainly not dismissing any of this at all. And that's wonderful.
Okay, so can I just refine that? So you agree that in a perfect scientific paradigm, if we're doing science properly, we should be able to go back to the good ideas of the past, the ones that produced real results, and incorporate them into our scientific world.
We can test them. We can test them. And if they work, then yes.
Yes. That's what I said.
Okay.
And if you agree with that the working ideas of the past, then I totally agree with you. Cool. And I feel like we can almost put that aside now.
I agree.
The question is what to do with, because I'm not anti-science. Hopefully you figured this out by now.
Well, I know that, but again,
and we're just framing
remember,
it as magic.
Just
we're
remember.
Just framing it as magic versus science.
But I'm playing devil's advocate here. So everyone, everyone will have this argument. Right. Because it's just like people are just like, what are you talking about? Magic? Come on. Okay. Carry on.
No. Okay. So the question is then, so I'm in my book, I also, I not only frame magic as what it's trying to do that's different to science, and how it's similar to science, because both science and magic are trying to produce results. It's just that magic is willing to incorporate results that are much more or entirely subjective. And science goes, oh, well, we can't do much with that.
Okay. So in that case, I'll just simply say one is right and one is wrong. And I think that if there are subjective results that can't be tested, well, that's great if that's inspirational for you in the same way that like reading poetry is or something like that. And that's great for the realm of like poetry and theater or whatever, pop music, I don't know, whatever. But that has nothing to do with science. And basically what I'm saying is that line of thinking, okay, great. That's a line of thinking from the past that not only has nothing to do with the modern scientific discourse, but should actively be kept out because it's counterproductive to our society moving forward.
Okay, so to answer that, I'm going to go back to another question you had. You brought up elves and I didn't reply to it. You brought up that, and this is not just Iceland. This is actually something that happens in the UK and New Zealand. And so they supposedly diverted some highway around Elfland. Also, elves live in rocks in Iceland. That's the myth. That's the mythology. That's the folklore. So they have rocks in their neighborhoods. There are some streets that have a rock with a house number on it where the elves live, just as a cultural fact. We've had similar discussions in New Zealand about taniwha. Taniwha are nature spirits, guardian spirits who are generally around bodies of water. And it's happened in the UK with, is it Hazelwood? Hazelwood's an elf tree in a fairy tree in folklore. So there's been protected hazel, I think it's hazelwood trees and things like that. So this happens in a lot of cultures. It's not just a quaint thing that the Icelanders do. There is probably an equivalent for it in just about all places that have a continued folklore. Cool. So the question is, if you're going to ask, are elves real? You're not going to get a scientific confirmation that elves are real. But I argue that might be the wrong question. That might not be a scientific question to ask. You can do science on elf experiences. So spirits, you're not going to get an ontological experiment that says that spirits are real or not, because spirits are in the category. But spirit experiences are real, and you can go around collecting spirit experiences, and you can come to data like a New Zealand study that found that more than 60% of people talk to a dead loved one, have an experience of talking to a dead loved one at some point on their life, and therefore it's quite normal to have spirit experiences, whether you have them on magic mushrooms or through some sort of family folklore, or whether it's fanciful or not. The question then, this is my line of thinking, is it ever useful to see elves? Well, here's one way it could be, because you're saying magical thinking is always bad. We should always replace it with objective thinking. But being able to get magical results from magical thinking can sometimes be beneficial. Here's what I mean. Someone grows up in a fairy culture, like perhaps Scotland, and they grow up being able to see fairies, or believing they can see fairies and having these experiences. It's clear something's going on. They deeply believe in it, but there is no way to prove the existence of the fairies. The other people around them can't see it. They grow into an adult, but throughout their life, they paint their experiences and draw beautiful paintings of these fairies. And in their adulthood, they become such a famous fairy artist that they start making a living from it, and it allows them to survive. And people are buying their paintings whether they believe in the idea that the fairies are really there or not. What previously was magical thinking is bad, maladaptive, bad for you, becomes an actual evolutionary survival tactic that is producing a better chance of survival for that actual person, and looks like an enviable skill, actually. Other people start drawing fairies and painting fairies and emulating them, hoping to get some of the same experiments. Given this for long enough, many people find that if you manipulate the human mind in exactly the right way, you get fairy-like experiences. At that point, there's a little thread of science in there.
Okay.
But also, the magical thinking can be adaptive, can be beneficial.
Okay, so then I will respond in this way. So you're saying that everyone has these experiences, so clearly something's going on. Well,
I said they are common. They're common.
Okay, so they're common. So okay, so there's clearly something going on here. Well, I agree with you, right? But what I would say is clearly what's going on is some combination of A, placebo, B, cultural construction of experiences with people around them. Because we know people can go to faith healing sessions and then they start convulsing and speaking in tongues because everyone around them is doing it. That doesn't mean that they're being possessed by an angel. There's a bit of cultural construction there. The third is you kind of allude to the fact that there may be something going on, maybe even physically producing this. And I will say, okay, great. Now I don't doubt in a second that people have these experiences and been having them throughout history. I'm just saying there's probably there's a scientific explanation. So a classic example would be sleep paralysis. So we know forever people have been reporting forever demon possession, incubi and succubi sitting on their chest, alien abduction, And all of these basically sound like the experience of sleep paralysis, where, for instance, you wake up, you're paralyzed, there's something in the room with you. This is now people have these things. Well, they say, well, aliens came into the room and paralyzed me with a ray gun and they were all around me and I couldn't move.
Have you had that experience?
Yes, I have. I've had sleep paralysis several times. So it's kind of like, well, and having that experience isn't, I will say this, investigating those experiences is a fascinating scientific pursuit. What's going to come out of it? Okay, so that I will agree with you on. What's going to come? So, like, for instance, let's say, following your line of argument, that we subject people who are seeing elves to MRIs, and we figure out there's a part of the brain which always lights up when that's happening, and then we use some type of stimulation to stimulate that part of do an experiment. So we have at least like 100,000 people do this to get statistical significance, because again, as you say correctly, magic is unrepeatable. Therefore, it's literally, you need 100,000 data points on anything to get statistical significance. So it's literally impossible with magic, because it's not real. That's why it's not possible. But let's say that, we find that part of the brain that produces that experience, and then we zap it and it produces similar experiences. Well, now we've learned something, and now we can kind of maybe move on from this old, and it's the same thing with alchemy becoming chemistry. Maybe we can move on from this old nonsense and proceed towards something real.
Why would you move on? Why wouldn't people then
why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't people purposely induce those experiences?
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
For their own enjoyment,
No. I'm saying that's what people should do. They would just understand what's actually happening, which is that part of the brain, stimulates the imagination or something, whatever it turns out to be.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying get rid of the supernatural explanation and get the natural one, get the real explanation.
By the way, I'm framing magic, and I've used many examples that aren't supernatural, right? In fact, I think the whole term supernatural is deeply silly, because it implies that we know a lot. It implies that there's things. I mean, the term nature is supposed to encompass everything. So what's supernatural? If there's a supernatural, then things like numbers and ideas and concepts are supernatural, and that's what I was sort of like trying to before. But part of the problem with the scientism kind of problems with magic is not being able to, not carefully quantifying what we're actually talking about. Cool. Okay. But here's my point. It doesn't stop being a magical experience, the ability to manipulate the perception in accordance with will. That's my working definition for my first book. I reserve the right to tweak that with each successive book, but that's my pragmatic magical thinking. The ability to manipulate perception in accordance with a will. It doesn't stop being a magical experience to induce fairies after you've scientifically figured out it can be done that way. It doesn't stop being a magical experience to have a succubus experience through sleep paralysis or a night hag. It doesn't stop. Magic is in that place there it's in the subjective realm, and it's a worthy pursuit in its own right, just as you art and music and things and fantasy and Harry Potter's, it's enjoyable, so it's valuable. Yeah, well, magic is too, and magical experiences are too, whether they're scientifically verified or not. Some of them are, some aren't.
Well, I think that,
and I gave an example of how the fairy experience might actually improve a person's life.
Okay,
or
so
make them
maybe if you wrote a book on, why imagining fairies will make your life better or something like that. That's just kind of a popular self-help book. Okay, great.
Ramsey Dukes already did that.
Yeah, I know. But that's not science, right? And Ramsey Dukes in that book literally says, just imagine it. So, that's a non-starter. Okay. And I think that, and also there's a broader question there, which is, I understand that this is kind of a counterculture pursuit or a phase people go through when they're younger, right? And it's important. It's a way that people assert their identity and show that they're special, and maybe pump up their own self-confidence. And that's all great. We all go through phases, okay, before we grow up, right? But Don't you think, however, that putting out the message into society that magic is real and you can make things happen with your mind, and it's kind of like, don't you think that that's just going to lead to narcissism and solipsism? I mean, this is where we get furries from, right? So it's like, like seriously, it's like you're kind of giving people a license to be delusional, don't you think?
What's wrong with furries?
Furries.
You bring up furries a lot.
What's not wrong with furries?
They clearly irk you. They clearly like trigger your turn your stomach a little bit. But they're not actually doing, like, you also live in the land of the free. It's like, why shouldn't they dress up and have
fair enough. But I mean,
things
other than a lot actually do turn out to be pedophiles and zoophiles and all that. But okay,
well, but I mean, surely you have worn a costume out in public.
I have never worn a fursuit once. And by the way, sir, I do not dress up for Halloween ever. This is what you get all 24/7. So yeah.
Okay, so
I don't believe in the imagination. I think that people should just run their lives from data and face reality. You know, it's like we have so many problems on this planet.
No.
Why should we be engaging in delusion?
No, that's where I'm going with this. If your goal is to get interesting, favorable social interactions with people, then dressing in particular ways, whether it's a costume or it's a woman or a man dressing immaculately in a way that people desire, or it's like me having a belly button length beard, all of these things produce socially gratifying results. This is why there's goths. This is why there's fairies. This is why there's people who are public wizards, and it's totally fine that you don't want to participate in that. But to assume that it's bad and people aren't getting something out of it, there's a reason that the word glamour assigned to the glamour industry is originally a magical word meaning to change your appearance, because it literally does produce very fascinating psychological results if you go out dressed in a costume. It can be any costume you like. It doesn't have to be a fairy costume or some kind of perverted whatever you're thinking, right? But just dressing up is a powerful thing that a lot of people get out of, and it's not a shallow thing, right?
Well, okay, but what does that have to do with? I mean, basically, so you use the word glamour. Glamour means illusion. You're just proving my point. I mean, it's like to use the language of someone from your camp, Austin Osmond Spare. He said, you know, were I to crown myself king, would I be? No. So and Crowley said. Aleister Crowley said the most magical way to open a door is to go over and turn the doorknob. And it's like, great. So basically what you're doing is describing normal physical reality, putting the word magic on it, putting a robe on, and trying to impress young people to give you money. Right? Like, that's all that is.
I've never accepted money as or have I? I generally
or whatever.
don't accept.
You get followers, get people to think you're cool, get a recording contract, whatever. You know, I mean,
so far,
it's obviously a scam, right?
Oh, so which part is a scam?
Well, magic is a scam because it's not real, and it's like you're giving people false hope, don't you think?
I'm sorry, I failed to follow the logic.
Okay, so
wearing costumes in public being something that produces real world results.
Well, okay. What I was
people who want to get excitement out of other people or want to be told they look nice.
Well, that's all great if people want to look nice on a Saturday night, but that has nothing to do with humanity's knowledge. You know, it's like, that's what I was saying. It's like, look, if this is just like a costume that you want to do this kind of Neil Gaiman thing where you dress up and impress goth girls, great. But that has nothing to do with the actual discourse on what reality is, nor should it.
Because, they're getting real results, which you just admitted.
Well,
so
who gets what results?
When you dress, which one are you going to want to go with, goths or furries? Either way, they are dressing in a certain way, and then, like a lot of costumes are very psychological, right? So, like, for instance, when I was younger and I went busking, you do not get given money generally by people wearing suits, even though people wearing suits probably have more money and suits are expensive. You get given money by people who are dressed casually. a lot of costumes people wear, whether it's just their fashion sense or otherwise, and even you, this includes even you with your attempt to not wear costumes, is a signal that you are open to talk to certain kinds of people, usually other people who look like you, and you want to not be talked to by other groups of people, usually people who don't look like you. The power of a costume, be it a public wizard, a furry, or a glamorous woman, or a dandy man in a tartan suit with a big bow tie, is that it's like an open sign that allows you to start up conversations with a huge amount of people that would not normally talk to you. And that is extremely powerful. And if you don't think it's extremely powerful, then you haven't tried it.
Okay, but that's just like fashion and like social skills. How is that magic?
And psychology, yeah.
Well, okay, yeah. So why put the word magic on that?
I guess because the way you frame it, if you frame it as if, because one of the most practical ways to get the job done the quickest is to frame it as if you're doing a charm spell in order to try and get people to behave a certain way, which is what musicians who are trying to make people dance are trying to do. It's what advertisers are trying to do, but it's what the furries are trying to do too.
Well, in that case, then I mean, end of conversation, right? It's like, but I mean, look, I mean, like, I get that, you know, this is like an artistic metaphor or whatever. I'll just ask this, okay? I'll just get straight to the point. Show me magic. Can you show me magic in a way that is not clearly, show me magic as you believe it. Like, show it to me right now. If it's real, you should be able to show me.
Cool. I do most of my magic through music. So I could do something musical, I guess.
Whatever you want to do.
So normally I'd play electric guitar, but I'll point the mic at this.
Okay. Great.
Okay. So remember that how I'm framing magic in this book is the ability to manipulate the perception in accordance with the will. So firstly, I'm going to show you how I might make people dance, and then which, you know, this is obviously not a framework where I'm probably going to make you dance because it's not a music venue, but I'm going to show you how I do that. And then I'm going to show you how music is actually inherently built on auditory illusions. So if you try and reduce music to numbers, you're going to get completely stuck because there's elements of music that are literally illusory. Cool?
All right.
Okay, so this is the spell that generally gets people to dance at my gigs. Can you hear it?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I can't hear it. No, it's totally silent. It's totally silent.
Okay, just a moment. There's a little button up here. What about this?
There you go. There you go.
That's Zoom. That's Zoom muting it. Unfortunately, here we go. So there's something about music. If you define a beat, all it is the a strumming pattern with the inclusion of some loud beats and some quiet ones. And generally guitarists, drummers, and modern musicians will put those on beats 2 and 4. I'm just going to show you the difference. Here's the thing that allows the trick to happen. And here is, if you play it this way, it doesn't work. So the difference? And without. There is something about adding loud beats in regular intervals, dynamic differences that directly goes to the part of the human brain that controls the body. And I saw even you, a tough customer, an internet connection, nodding your head.
I will say that I was nodding my head without realizing it.
And this is one of the most tricky, because a part of a musical charm spell is how I like to frame it, is the venue as part of it. This is one of the hardest venues possible, through a little tiny camera with a little microphone, and yet he's still nodding his head, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, cool. So
if this was a live show, I would have had the audience clapping. That was great.
Yeah.
I can hear myself, by the way, out of your speakers, so you might want to mute me because I'm echoing on that side.
Okay, so that was there was a little mute function before. Okay, so the next one is, there's been this idea through history. I'm sure you know enough about, Renaissance thought and everything. They had this idea called music of the spheres, in which they were trying to explain the entire world through a collision between mathematics and music. So for modern people, why are there 7 colors in the rainbow? Do you know, Jason?
No, actually, I don't. Or if I do, I've forgotten. So go ahead.
Okay. Because isn't it a spectrum, Mr. Science? Aren't colors? Couldn't we have 4 colors or 32? Isn't it arbitrary? The reason we have 7 colors of the rainbow, Jason, is because Isaac Newton decided we should, because 7 is a magical number, as you well know, and he was trying to align his theory of colors, which he was a proto-scientific theory, with the notes of the major scale. And there are 7 different notes in music, and there's A, B, C, D, F, G, and then the 8th one is the octave. Cool?
Okay. I did not know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, so the 7, that's a remnant in our culture. It's totally arbitrary. Scientifically, there's no reason why there should be 7. But there's all these symbolic, as you well know as a magic teacher, there's all of these symbolic numerological leftovers.
Why haven't they got that out of there yet?
Yeah, cool. This comes from Pythagoras. He's the father of our music theory. He discovered that if you take the harmonics of a string, if you take the third harmonic, which is a musical fifth,
nothing played. Nothing played right there.
Oh, sorry. If you take the musical fifth, sorry.
Kinda. Yeah, it's not really picking up. I think Zoom is like cutting out like 80% of that.
Yeah, Zoom's cutting it out. Sorry about that. Yeah. How's this? The musical fifth. That if you pile a fifth upon a fifth upon a fifth upon a fifth, which is the third harmonic, so you take a string and you cut off a third, and then you cut off another third and another third and another third, you will get 12 repetitions that are all unique notes, and on the 13th, you'll find the octave. You'll find a higher vibration of the one you started on. So if you started on an A, you'll go through all 12 notes that are on a guitar, and then you'll end up on another A again on the 13th. That's the reason we have 12 notes. Pythagoras was pleased about this. It aligned with the zodiac, and 12 months of the year. 12 was another important numerical idea. Because of that, proto-scientists, musicians, decided that music could be explained by numbers. Because there is order and dissonance in music, and this is what I'm going to show you next, that therefore the entirety of order in the universe could be explained by analogy through music. Cool. This doesn't work. The music cannot be explained explicitly in numbers. for this reason. I'll show you. So I'm going to run a little experiment here. I'm going to play you some intervals and ask you whether they are dissonant or consonant. Consonant means they sound pleasant and the notes rhyme together, and dissonant. So firstly, I'm going to make it explicit. So this is dissonance. This is consonance. Understand? Okay, so is this interval dissonant or consonant?
That sounds consonant to me.
Sounds consonant? Okay, what about this one?
It sounds like halfway.
Cool. So it could be considered dissonant. Cool. Halfway is actually the correct answer. If I put a note in between, consonant?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. If I take that middle note out, those are the same two notes you heard from the beginning. So that middle note fixes its disorder, makes it heard as a consonance, and then when I take that note out, you go away hearing it as a consonance. Now, something's interesting here. Most people say that those two notes are dissonant until I play the middle note. I remove the middle note, and then they remain consonant. So you're hearing two notes, and it's an auditory illusion. It's an auditory illusion as to whether you hear them consonant or dissonant. This means that music is not made out of numbers. This means that the human perception is an integral part of music, and music is at its core partly illusion, partly illusory. Cool?
Okay.
Partly illusion. And yet, the effects of music are real, have been scientifically measured. And your general opinion has been that illusion is wrong. We should only have, we should try and get closest to objective reality always better. Would you remove music from the world, Jason?
Yes.
Cool. Well, that's us done.
you set that one up. Tell you what, let's do this. We're at the 2-hour mark. Why don't we do this? I'm going to put a poll on Twitter, now known as x.com.
Awesome.
Why don't, whichever, we can flip a coin if you want to see who goes first. You make your final point. I'll make my final point, and then I'll put a poll on Twitter and people can weigh in as to who they think won this debate. How's that?
Okay, cool.
Okay. Actually, do you have a coin handy? I don't. Maybe you can flip a coin.
I spent all my coins.
Okay.
I'll flip a guitar pick.
Okay, perfect. I will do heads. I guess like heads.
Okay, I'll do it
first.
again. I'll do it again.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. Yeah, I call heads. I call heads.
Your heads?
Yeah, I call heads.
Yeah, you get heads.
Okay. My argument succinctly is, while I do not, reject the fact that magical thinking is something that was important to people historically, we've moved on that it constitutes a bunch of untested hypotheses. We tested those hypotheses. Most of them turned out to be wrong. The ones that turned out to be right, we refined and got modern science out of, and we should proceed from that. If there was such a thing as magic, it's a thing of the past, and it existed only as the packing foam that science came in. That's my point.
Awesome. My point is that objectivity is never something you arrive at. Therefore, most of the time, your choice is not between subjectivity and objectivity. It is between better magical thinking and worse magical thinking, and that magical thinking is neutral, and therefore to dismiss it all basically means you have very little power to act in the world at all.
Okay.
Is that succinct enough? It's
absolutely.
Little messy,
No, that's absolutely succinct enough. I may have a slightly biased audience towards your side. Okay, I will put this on x.com. It's funny. I have to call it that
Amazing.
now. And I will pin it to the top of my profile, and I'll leave it up for a week. And we will see what people say. All right. We didn't get to everything, but let's put a bookmark in it for now, and tell us where people can get your book and find out more about you.
Thank you so much, Jason, for having me on. I've been listening to your show for a long time, so it means a lot. My book is available, released by Aeon Books. As far as I can tell, it's pretty much everywhere you buy books online. You can get it. You can definitely get it on Amazon. You can definitely get it on Aeon Books' own website. Most places you buy books, it's there. Came out on Halloween.
And it's called Pragmatic Magical Thinking, Real Magic Explained.
Pragmatic Magical Thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
Pragmatic Magical Thinking, Real Magic Explained. All of these ideas I've been through, almost all of them are in that book, and plenty more. And I am currently writing a second book, which will be out about a year from now. It's called Tarot, Psychic Results for Skeptics.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. And till next time, that was a great conversation. Thank you for participating in advanced podcasting, and to all the audience as well.
Jason.
Don't forget to vote at x.com.
That was both fun and totally brutal.
Hopefully it was fun. It was fun for me too. Thank you for giving me the chance to take the opposite side for once. For once in my life.
This is exactly why I wanted to talk to you, actually, because you've often said you've often come on the side of science and said you're a skeptic, and yet you're got the largest magic teaching on the internet. Yeah.
And yet I'm a complete loon.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.